Yanis, thank you so much for joining me here. You recently published a very, very lovely paper that I want to talk about. But before we talk about that paper, can you say a few words about yourself?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Dan, for inviting me. So, my name is Janis Zickfeld. I'm a postdoc at the Department of Management at Aarhus University in Denmark. And my main research is on moral psychology and business ethics. And I'm mainly researching why people behave dishonestly, why do they cheat, why do they lie. And also, I try to look at interventions on reducing these behaviors. So, trying to reduce people cheating in common tasks, for example.
Yeah. So, so basically, there's all kinds of dishonest behavior, and the question is why they're happening, what's the mechanism, and if we understand better the mechanism, maybe we could come up with better solutions. The solutions that people have been trying so far don't seem to work as well. So what can we do? So that's great. And within this context, the paper you published, it's called the Megastudy. So maybe a few words about what's a mega study.
Yes, Megastudy are just surfacing recently. They are a bit different in approach to a common study. So in a common study, let's say a common experiment, you would typically have a measure. In our case, we can take dishonesty, and then we would manipulate one factor, for example, that we change the environment, and then we see what is the impact of the change in the environment on our outcome, dishonesty. And the interesting thing about mega studies is that they do this not with one intervention, but they use many different interventions in one study. For example, 40, 50, several interventions that have been designed by different scientists in these big projects. This
So
is the main
so
difference.
yeah. So if I catch
So,
it,
so
in a regular study, you test one theory and you test it with maybe a two-cell design or a three-cell design, but you focus on one theory. And and because each study focuses on one theory, it's very hard to compare between studies. They studied this, did this, and they studied this. This a mega study is trying to basically say, let's take lots of interventions and let's test all of them, but it also tests them in a playing level field that allows us to compare them at least in that environment. So in your study,
right.
how many different interventions did you try?
Yes. So in our study, we looked at the effect of honesty pledges or honesty oath on the outcome of dishonest behavior. And we used in total 20 different main interventions. They were suggested by 44 different behavioral scientists that took part in the project. And we also had one control condition, which was no honesty pledge. And we also had the so-called baseline oath, where we just used the minimal formulation of an honesty pledge in that condition. So in total, we had 22 different treatments, and every person was then randomly just assigned to one of these treatments, and then we measured the same outcome.
So in a way, it's like taking 22 papers and conducting them all in parallel and allowing for this comparison.
Right.
Um,
It's like meta-analyzing 22 different studies, right? Taking them together, looking at the overall outcome.
how much more work is this compared to a regular paper?
Well, that's a good question. Typically, it involves lots of different researchers. So there you can distribute some work. I would say there, if you distribute it properly, then it's not too much more work. The most interesting thing, I guess, is that you can reach larger populations with these kind of studies, which is also important as we have typically problems in statistics with, for example, statistical power, so that the tests are not powered high enough. They can't really say much about the actual results with too low, too small sample sizes.
Yeah.
So this takes
So,
also care of that. Yeah.
so how many people participated in this paper? How many participants?
So in this study, we targeted around 22,000 people because we had 22 interventions. We wanted to have 1,000 per intervention. And in the end, we reached 21,506 people from the UK and the US in an online context. Yeah.
Very good. And how many authors were on this paper?
In total, we had 44 researchers involved in the project at different stages. I think in the end, there are 41 people on the author list of that paper. Yeah.
Okay, so very big effort, very important, right? You could say that maybe the field tries different things, and then at some point you want to say, okay, now that we know what works in general, let's take all of our knowledge, combine it, and test it all. It's a wonderful thing to do. What did you learn? What was some of the main conclusions?
I think for once this gives a nice indication that just doing a single study with one intervention can be rather useless in many cases because you can't really compare it to other types of interventions at the same time and in the same population. So in most cases, if you want to look at more practical outcomes or more applied cases, it makes sense to test many different interventions at the same time. So this definitely has been something that we've learned through this process. I think it is also always helpful to have a coordinated way of doing science to involve many people in a collaborative context. This typically helps to bundle resources and everything, and yeah, is I think the way forward in most of the social science to do research as well.
Yeah. So, but what did you find? So the main issue is about honesty pledges. So you have a task in which people can be more or less honest, up to them. They have an
Hmm.
incentive to 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 cheat, and the question is how much will they cheat? And the type of intervention is an honesty pledge. All kinds of
Right.
things like I promise not to cheat, all kinds of things that this. And the question is, to what extent are these honesty pledges, signing, declaring, checking a box, all kinds, 22 different versions of that? To what extent are those honesty pledges reducing the dishonesty in the task where people are incentivized to,
Right.
they get to earn more if they cheat?
Yeah.
So what did you learn about, do these honesty pledges work, under what conditions?
Yeah. So we used, as you said, we used an economic tax evasion game, which is quite common in economics to use. So people earn a small amount of money, and then they are asked to declare that income that they earned, and then the tax is applied. In our case, the tax was used to be paid to the British Red Cross or the American Red Cross, so it actually went to charity. Um, and then we can see whether people evaded their taxes. And the idea is, of course, that we want to check is whether, if they do an honesty pledge before declaring their taxes, whether they have a higher tax compliance, so evade less taxes. What we actually find across these 21 different treatments that we have is that they are quite different in the way they work. So we have some treatments that work quite well. The best treatment actually reduces the tax or increases tax compliance by 8.5 percentage points, which is quite good for this types of intervention, I would say. And the least effective one doesn't really have any difference from the control, so from not using any honesty pledge. And if we look at these plot of the 21 different interventions, we can really see any type of effect that we have across these, which basically means that honesty pledges can be helpful, at least based on these findings in these contexts, but the formulation seems to be really important. And
Yeah.
also different aspects like what is the context where they're employed in. For example, we changed whether they were placed right before the text declaration or early on. And we find that if they appear right before the text declaration, that seems to help a bit. It seems to increase text compliance. People become less dishonest. And we also change whether people, for example, just check the box to commit to these honesty pledges, or if they had to retype the statement. The idea is that retyping the statement, you get more committed because you have to retype that whole statement in your own words as well, or copy it. And we found a small indication that this could work a bit more effective, but overall, this wasn't really a big difference. I would say it also depends on the type of formulation.
What about the check the box? Did the check the box work?
The checkbox worked mostly on average. It worked somewhat less well for some of these interventions, but this also depended really much on the formulation as well.
Yeah. And does it is it important how far away the honesty pledge is from the reporting?
Yeah, based on what we found is that people had a higher compliance, so they were less dishonest if it was right before the text declaration. So that seems to be important. However, the effect wasn't too big. So here we can discuss whether the effect is sensible, whether it is of practical relevance, and this depends on different perspectives, I would say. So far, we need more research to evaluate whether this is helpful or not.
Yeah. So if I try to summarize, lots of different approaches. People had a task in which they had a selfish incentive to declare less tax. In
Right.
this particular case, the tax was not real tax. It went to a charity that people think is a great charity. So, the incentive not to cheat is both moral, personal moral, and that it's helping this. But nevertheless, some people um, cheat on their Red Cross tax, let's call it. And then, on average, honesty pledges decrease cheating, they decrease
Yeah.
tax evasion, but there's a large variance between between them. And things that are important are things like the distance from it. If people do it early on, maybe they forget or they're not as sensitive. About engagement, are people engaging in it, or doing mindlessly? Um, Repeat again, what was the most successful one?
So the most successful one is just focusing on what dishonesty means in this context. It just tells something about the specific behavior. So instead of saying, I hereby declare that I will be honest when reporting information in the study. It says I will be honest when reporting my income from the tax gain.
Yeah,
So it is really, really small difference in formulation. You just refer to that specific behavior. And in general, what we see in these formulations is that if we refer to a specific change in the environment that kind of reduces the so-called moral wiggle room, if you want, so that it's clearer what is dishonesty, what is honesty in this context, then these seem to work better. So if we just tell people, well, there is nothing in the middle, you can either be honest or dishonest when reporting your taxes in this game, this seems to work better, for example, than focusing on trust with regard to others, or empathy or compassion and so on. So there seems to be some difference in the formulations as well.
understand.
What also works well and also replicating is, for example, social norms. So telling that others also behave in a similar way, that also had a higher impact of reducing tax evasion.
Yeah, very good. So in general, um, good news for research on dishonesty and honesty, because this tool, which is seemingly a very small, simple tool, seem to have some effectiveness and
Hmm.
potentially a substantial one. If we think
Yeah.
about 8% reduction in tax compliance, I mean, it's probably, it's a, again, we're moving to a different story, but probably a big, could be a big issue. So on the debate on honesty pledge, I think the study is basically saying they have a future, but not all prompts are created equal, and it's a
Right.
big issue of testing the right one. So if you were now facing a policymaker,
Hmm.
let's say you got a call from a government in country X, and they ask, Yanis, what should I do? What would you tell them?
Well, based on the results that we have here, we of course have to take into account how generalizable these are. So we use a fictitious tax game. This is not directly comparable to actual tax declarations in real life. That's something we have to take into account. Still, people played for actual money, and actual money went to charity here. So people lost or gained money by being dishonest or honest. So that also at least reflects some of real life consequences here. But we also need to take into account, of course, that the situation is not in real life tax declarations.
It's not a
So
tax.
we have to be a bit careful before making any strong conclusions. If someone would approach me and asking about it, I would say, well, it seems that some formulations might be more effective than others. I would probably suggest to test this in another run of studies to be more certain about it. But if that is the case, then focusing, for example, on reducing ambiguity in these, for example, a text declaration context might be a good idea to use with these honesty pledges.
So
And I think,
if
yeah,
somebody came to you, you would say, if you're willing to do an experiment, here are the top 4 or 5 things from the mega study that you should test. And if you're
yeah,
not willing to do an experiment, here is my recommendation for you. But the big thing is distance, clarity, lack of ambiguity, social norm. Try to include all of those elements.
yeah. So based on this study and on previous studies, because of course there's a large literature on these honesty pledges, where they're sometimes effective, sometimes not effective, and I think we're also giving at least some answer why they might not be effective in certain cases, because it strongly depends on the formulation based on what we've seen in this study and these results. But taken together, what we can say is that first of all, reducing ambiguity seems to be helpful. It seems to be helpful to say exactly what dishonesty or honesty means in the specific context. It also seems helpful to have a stronger commitment if possible. So, for example, some studies show that doing a signature offline seems more effective than doing a signature online, for example, or just checking a box. The question is how practical are these in real life? Checking a box is an easy intervention to implement. And for proximity or placement, it seems to be important to place this right before the target behavior where dishonesty could occur. That's also important to take into account when when evaluating these in more practical applications.
Very good. Looking forward to seeing what you come up with next. I
Yeah.
hope your studies will be as important and illuminating as this one. And thank you very much for leading this incredible initiative. I think you were overly modest. It takes a lot of effort and coordination. There are not that many mega studies, and it's wonderful that you're engaged in it. So I want to say thank you from the research in general in this field. It's very, very helpful to have this.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Thanks for your interest, Dan, and thanks for taking part as well.
okay. And for now, all the best.
All the best. Thanks. Bye.